Hi, my name is Marilyn. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I would like to share a bit of my story, how having a food addiction has impacted my life and how it has been a major catalyst for me in my spiritual search and spiritual journey. And so, starting at the very beginning, I grew up in a small town in northwestern Minnesota in a Scandinavian Lutheran farming community, and I was the fourth of six children. And from a young age, I remember starting to sneak food. And I don't know if, being a middle child in a big family, maybe I've felt a bit lost in the shuffle. I know that children between the ages of 4 and 6, our nervous systems are still very porous and highly sensitive. So with overwhelm, whether it's emotional or sensory or relational, that food can be the most available means of trying to self-regulate. So anyway, I started sneaking food, and there was some shame associated to it, right from the start. And but still I did it. And then when I was in the fourth grade, when I was entering puberty, I started to gain some weight. And I never became really big, but I was overweight and very unhappy, in my body. And then in the fifth grade, my friends started to get boyfriends, and I wanted somebody to like me. I wanted to be chosen. And I somehow equated, being chosen and worthy with, being attractive. And for me to be attractive, I needed to lose weight. And so I became obsessed as a fifth grader with dieting. And I learned the calorie count of most every food. And I was trying so hard to lose weight and never could, was always fighting against myself, always still overeating. And then when I was about 13, and I don't know how I came across this idea, because I never heard of anybody else doing it. I'd never heard of bulimia, but I got the idea to try to stick my fingers down my throat. And so I did, one day after eating way too much and feeling so uncomfortable, that I stuck my fingers down my throat and it all came out, and I felt so relieved. And that started a pattern. And I had felt very ashamed before, but now I felt really ashamed. And just the thought of anybody else finding out about it horrified me. And since I lived in a house with so many people in it, I had to find places to go in order to relieve myself. So I found different kind of abandoned places around town, or a field or a woods area on the edge of town, and that's what I would do, and started living this double life. And so this went on throughout high school. And, from the very start, I was so sincerely asking God to help me. I remember, one time, I must have been around 14. It was a Sunday afternoon. I remember the sky, the clouds. I was in this field north of town that I'd just thrown up. And I was there, and I prayed, like, from the depths of my soul, God, please help me. Please help me. Please save me from myself. And then when I was about 16, I became a born again Christian. And this is kind of unusual in this little town. So it was just me and two of my girlfriends. And that we started going to this church in another town. And but it was during this time that I really started to question Christianity, because they taught about, Jesus is the only way. And I thought, how can it be if somebody, believes in God with another name, they're wrong? They'll go to hell? That made no sense to me. Or if somebody, lived an integrous, righteous life, they go to hell? So it started me deeply questioning. And so then I went to university, and during that time I discovered yoga and modern dance. And it was especially due through the dance that and moving my body that I started to re-inhabit my body in a much more healthy way, because up till this time I had so much self-loathing and self-hatred of myself. But through doing the dance, that I started to redefine my experience in myself. And I was studying music at the time, and I remember one of the visiting professors saying that the true purpose of dance was to invoke spiritual energy. And that just like, ooh, I still remember that, hearing that for the first time. There was something that really woke up in me with that, but I didn't know what that meant really. And so at the end of 4 years at the university, I went to Europe and did on a tour with my university choir. And we were traveling with these professional singers and orchestra performing Handel's Messiah with these 5 different choirs from around the States. It was an amazing experience. But during this time, I was reading the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And it was in reading this book that it described God as not some external authority, but something that can be experienced, that presence can be experienced in us. And so that interested me very much. And so after the tour ended, I had a 3-month Eurail pass. So I started traveling around Europe, and the only thing I wanted to do was find my spiritual path, find my teacher, find my guru. And so I started traveling around to all these and visiting all these yoga centers and spiritual centers, and looking, where's my path. And it was quite an adventure with all these different groups. And I was with the Hare Krishnas for a while. And anyway, eventually I came across this organization that was founded in India, but it was all over the world, and they taught meditation and yoga for free and did all kinds of different social service projects. And so the ideology attracted me a lot, and they did a lot of singing and a sort of dance as well. So I was very interested, and so I wrote to my parents, and I had $300 left of this inheritance money that I'd gotten from my grandparents. So I had them send that money reluctantly to me so that I could buy a ticket to India. So I went to India and went to the center of this organization and met the guru. And it was during this time that I decided to dedicate my life. I become a nun with this spiritual organization, and the theme of it was self-realization and service to humanity. And I very much wanted that my life could be for some good. I just didn't, feel much future in my life. At the time, I'd studied social work when I was going to university, and I just felt like the problems are so deep in society. Anyway, this felt like something that called to me. And so I became a nun with this organization, and I didn't come back to the States for 15 years. The idea was that the whole world became your family, and you didn't go back to the family that you were raised in. And so I was traveling and working primarily in Europe and Eastern Europe, what was the Soviet Union at the time, and traveling to India sometimes. And it was a very difficult life because we didn't live in convents or ashrams or anything like that. We were kind of sent off on our own to start these projects with no money and no resources. But it was a very dedicated devotional class and path, and I did it very sincerely. As far as the food addiction, I stopped throwing up during this time, very thankfully, but the food addiction never left me. I always kept sneaking food and eating too much and too often, and I felt ashamed as well, because here I was supposed to be this example, this teacher, and I could not control myself. So after about 15 years, I went through a personal experience that caused me to start questioning what I had dedicated myself to. And it took me about 2 years of some very deep soul searching to come to the clarity that I needed to leave from this spiritual commitment in order to go ahead in my own spiritual life. And so at last, I finally came back to my family, came back to the States, and one of my older brothers, he took me in and let me live with him, and I started a new life. And after about 2 years, I came out to California, to San Diego. And it was during this time that I met my husband and got married and lived very harmoniously for over 20 years. But even so, the food addiction never left. It was perhaps more balanced than I'd ever experienced in my life, but every day I was eating too much and too often. And as far as me and my body, and I'm a dancer, and my body is my instrument and my laboratory and my temple, so I was always sabotaging that. So it was awful in a lot of ways. And so what happened then in 2020, when the pandemic came around and the whole world was going into lockdown, I was kind of I went into my own bubble, my own inner lockdown, where I was so focused on two things. I wanted to find out what was under this pain and stiffness that I had developed in my body several years before that. Like from one day to the next, I developed this pain in my hips and in my back. It was like one day to the next, all of a sudden I had my mother's body. She was deeply arthritic for years and went through a lot of pain. And I tried a lot of things. I practiced yoga regularly and went to chiropractors and all kinds of stuff, but nothing really helped. And so I knew that all physical conditions have a mental, emotional component to it. So I wanted to find out what's under it. And the other thing was I wanted to know what was under this food affliction that I'd experienced my whole life. So what I did was I would every day come and spread out a blanket on my living room floor, and I would put on some music that I like, some kind of slow meditative music, and I would just close my eyes and feel my body. And I was very aware with the food addiction that I ate because I was so uncomfortable to feel uncomfortable stuff. You know, if anything came up that was uncomfortable at all, it was like food, food. What can I eat to calm myself, to pacify myself? And so I started to be, a little willing to feel what was uncomfortable. I was in prayer and intention to, help me see, help me find out. And so I would also start to slowly move my body, and eventually I'd run into some place where I felt pain or stiffness, and so I would just hang out there and feel. And what would happen was that invariably that some kind of image or scene would appear in my mind, or some kind of sensation or condition would show up of me or of my mother or grandmother or ancestors, and I became aware of there's something known as ancestral, what's it called? Ancestral program? No, ancestral, I don't know, but it's patterning that when the ancestors experience some kind of trauma, that this is carried on, in the DNA, and especially, through the mother, through if she's experienced some kind of trauma or something in the pregnancy, that goes, into the child as well. And I remember my grandparents talking about their parents and the conditions, before they, immigrated to the States, that there was famine and poverty. My grandmother would talk about starving Norway. And so then I realized that that could very well explain this uncontrollable stuff that I have around food and panic and making sure that I have enough to eat, even though it's, I have much more than I need. And so by starting to allow myself to feel these uncomfortable feelings or whatever would come up, I felt, an unraveling start to happen within my body and my nervous system. And with this, what would happen was that I would experience that I would have access to, or I would plug into, kind of a bigger perspective or a higher perspective. I kind of felt like I was plugging into my higher self or my intuitive self or my unconscious, subconscious, superconscious mind aspects of self. And so this continued, this showing up daily and with my intention, just starting to be still and feel and moving and feeling and opening up this communication with this greater viewpoint that I've continued with to this day. And so intention is, with my channel, is here to start sharing these things and hopefully to be in support to others that are called into into a healing journey, into a spiritual awakening. And I know that we are all so unique. For me, I experience everything through my body. That's how I access my intuition, and I'm so interested in finding ways to keep vital and vibrant at any age. And so thank you for listening up till now. And if this is something that you like, that you're interested, I ask you to please like my video, subscribe to my channel. If you have any comments, please leave comment. I'll also leave my email address if you want to write to me. And thanks again. And I look forward to sharing with you on my next video. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.